Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jack Chen. I'm the director of the Asian Pacific American Institute here at NYU. We're really delighted that you could all make it here, and especially delighted to host Grace Lee's film. You should also all know that Grace Lee did the documentary about Grace Lee Boggs, and I just thought we should acknowledge Grace's passing. She was really a great philosopher and revolutionary, and somebody who came from New York and then contributed to so much of how we understand things and think about things, especially to Detroit, and kind of a larger vision and inspiration about how change can happen. So thank you, Grace, for making that film, but also for kind of getting her just at the right moment in which you could really kind of share her insights at a key point in her life. So part of the ongoing issue that we have at APA is, does it hold together? Is it a concept that really works? And I think really through this film, we begin to get some insights, not about the stereotypes that people have about, chop suey or Asian food or what the latest trend is, but something deeper in the culture that really speaks to not so much the head sitting on top of the body, but food as a core way of relating and sociability and a core meaning of what life is about. So in some ways, once I looked at the early footage of the early cut of the film, I'm a little, kind of, is this going to work? Going across so many different groups and traveling across so many different places. But it was really, in some ways, at a point that that Jonathan's pilgrimage to his grandfather, and this little scene that in which he's, as the dutiful grandson, is checking out to see if his grandfather will approve of this combination that he's created, and the grandfather says in Mandarin, "Oh, this is very good." And then there's a pause, and it's like a perfect kind of, almost like a punchline, and he says, and what kind of, you can add in, what the hell? He didn't really say what the hell, and what the hell is this thing, and in some ways that immediately spoke to me. My mother would have said, oh, this is interesting, but it's not really Chinese, right? Would have been what she would have said. But it immediately reminded me of a sense of home, and a connection about the importance of food, but not just food, but also that there's always incredible standards that go with it. And that even in the case of a grandfather, in the case of a mother, you're always trying to not only gain their approval, but also there's a real standard in terms of how rigorous and how serious food is taken. So in some ways that began to say to me that, there's a larger set of connections that are very different than, let's say, Western culture. And it's not a simple matter of somehow we become Americanized and these things don't matter anymore. But food and the core values that are embodied in food and a certain way of being actually continue on, even if our language skills increasingly become lacking, but there's still something at the core of that. I just wanted to say a few acknowledgments of those who are co-sponsoring this with us. Thank you so much for the Center for Asian American Media, and as I understand it, Cam really helped to kind of spearhead and approach Grace about the creation of a film like this. The Museum of Chinese America and the Department of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health at NYU's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development, of which Krishnendu Ray is actually the chair of that department. I just wanted to kind of offer a couple short little procedural activities so that you need to keep this program. There is a reception at the APA Institute right after this event, and on the back is a map showing you how to get there. It's actually not that far, so just kind of follow the lines, or you can even Google map it, but you don't really need to, it's not that far. But you need to keep this to be able to get in. And Wilson has supplied some foods from Nam Hua, so that'll be the incentive. So you're kind of like a little mouse going through the maze, and you'll get there and you get some treats at the end of that. So please keep the program to be able to qualify that. So without any more delay, I wanted to introduce Grace Lee, and she wanted to say a few words of introduction to the film. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. I also just wanted to thank the Asian Pacific American Institute at NYU, and especially Amita, for organizing this. It's a real pleasure to be able to share a film with an audience, and especially a New York audience, since we have a New York story in this program. As I think Jack mentioned, Center for Asian American Media first approached me. I had done a previous film many years ago called The Grace Lee Project, which sort of looked at Asian America through the lens of the incredibly common name of Grace Lee, which is my name and Grace Lee Boggs' name. But they had liked that film, and they said, how would you tackle sort of, again, Asian America, whatever that is? And I immediately thought, let's try something with food, because food has a sort of accessibility to many people. And, maybe in the process we can sort of get closer at what this kind of sometimes undefinable concept of Asian America is. So hopefully I'm excited to actually have the panel and have a conversation with you all. So please ask questions, and whether it's at the panel or at the reception afterward, and I look forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much.
So we have about half an hour, so I'm sure that there's lots of questions and comments from the audience, and so I'm going to start up the conversation, and then we will open it up to everyone, and then we'll go have some food from Namwa. But I want to start by introducing the folks here. We have one person who's in the bathroom. We'll be back in a second. But to my left is Eurie Chung, who's the producer of Off the Menu. Grace Lee, as you know, the director. We have Wilson Tang, restaurateur, as you recognize from Namwa and Fung Tu. The invisible person next to him is Jonathan Wu, chef from Fung Tu. He'll be back in a sec. And finally, we have Krishnendu Ray, who's the chair of the NYU Food Studies department. And I wanted to start. There's so many questions I have about this film, and in a way, I have a question about flavor and creativity, actually, to begin with. And part of this is aimed at Wilson, at Jonathan, so I'll sum it up when he comes. But so much in this film there's so much concern about ethnic authenticity. It's like, is this Chinese food? Is this Japanese food? But if we were to ask, is this Asian American food authentically Asian American? It's almost funny, but it actually is funny, because I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, because Asian America is so hard to sum up. But I'm just so curious to think about, is how might we sort of describe what an Asian American taste might be, or an Asian American aesthetics might be? And are there characteristics about who we are as social, political, or cultural beings? And we have Jonathan Wu from Fung Tu. So we're talking about flavor and creativity. And I was wondering, how might, and we have writers, we have filmmakers, we have chefs up here. How might you, from your perspective, think about what defines what an Asian American taste might be, or an Asian American film? And in watching this, I think about, in terms of film, Grace and Eurie, there's something about, maybe it's about self-reflexivity or self-deprecating humor, or a certain way of seeing or looking or having empathy, and maybe in terms of taste, it's about, like, I don't know, a complexity or a subtlety or a bombast or food that has a narrative, that's distinctively Asian American. But beyond being Chinese American food, and Jonathan, I know that you've talked about, you've used the term Asian American food before, which is, I think not a lot of folks use that term. And I'm kind of, maybe we can start with you. I'm kind of curious how you might describe what that is.
So the question is how I describe Asian American food?
Yeah, like, because you've talked about Chinese food or Chinese American food, but how you might, what does it mean to be Asian American food? Because the film talks about mana, and we talk about the spirit of stuff, but I'm just wondering, when you're creating flavors, well, here's an example. I read in the Times a couple of weeks ago that Fung Tu lost its gas for a while. Do you still have gas or no gas?
We have gas
now.
You
have gas back. Yeah. But I heard when you had no gas, you were you figured out and you started using these hot pot stoves to make food, which to me strikes me as the ultimate immigrant cuisine, which is making something out of nothing and being super resourceful. But I'm curious, when you start to use these makeshift things, like using a washing machine to beat your octopus, like, did you discover new tastes or new ways of things or new textures? Because that to me seems like it might be a way of capturing what an Asian American food might be. Or what did you discover when you started using those hot pot burners?
Yeah. I discovered that I prefer gas. Yeah, there was a resourcefulness.
Yeah. Would anything like make it into the menu of Fung Tu from that experiment?
From that particular experience, no. I mean, there was.
That was kind of tough. From a business standpoint, I mean, everything took twice as long. The prep time took more. Everything was more and more and more. But,
I mean, okay. So maybe there is some sense of resilience that maybe I could attribute to seeing the way my folks are, or my grandparents, how they survived a lot of hardships, and they're also they hate to waste food. They never waste food. I mean, it could be a delivery of Meals on Wheels, and it's honestly pretty bad food, but they're not going to throw it out. They'll eat it, and to the point of where it's almost going bad. So that sense of not wasting and the preciousness of food, that's something that is imbued in the Fung Tu kitchen. I mean, we try to waste as little as possible, and
it strikes me, it's like we talk about things being a flavor bomb, but it's like looking at your food, it's like a story bomb that goes in your mouth. Like you can watch someone, and you talk about this, like a flavor memory. Krishnendu, do you want to add to this?
No, in fact, what I like about the Asian American category, and by the way, Grace, this is beautiful film, and this is the second time I've watched it, and powerful. What I like about the category, in fact, it rattles the cages of easy association between race and nation, everywhere in the world. It's a difficult category to pin down, and I think it complicates the idea of territory and taste. And reinvigorates it in interesting ways. And so for me, that is the most attractive aspect of the category of Asian American and Asian American taste is it's difficult to pin down. And that's what taste is in most places in the world. We create an artificial category of kind of national and racial association with things that are basically I would say institutional food. Real taste is always slippery and difficult to pin down. And Asian American taste is precisely productive because of that.
There's this sort of uncategorizability of Asian America that's sort of...
And there's a literalness to it, and it's difficult to turn into words. I mean, there are loquacious cuisines in the world, and there are less loquacious cuisines in the world. The more interesting one are the less loquacious ones.
And Grace and Eurie, I mean, in thinking about making an Asian American film, I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts on this. What does it mean to make an Asian American film versus like a Korean American film?
Well, I think because it was in a way an assignment to look at Asian America, and I still don't really know what that means. I thought it would be an interesting exercise to, at one point we thought, it might be a series. But then we just got the funding to do this one, and I was like, that's a lot of pressure, to like include all these different kinds of, Asian America is so vast. There's so many different cultures and languages and generation, all this stuff. And so the only thing I could think to do was to make it as diverse, or if you want to say the other way, inclusive as possible. And that sort of involved, some people thought, why... Strangely, people think that India is not part of Asia. I mean, people would say, like, why are there Indians? Why do you include Sikhs and Hawaiians? I'm like, I never thought, I mean, I guess in my taste of what Asian America is, I would include that, you know. So maybe that's just part of my own experience or interest. But part of the exercise was to not have it be pigeonholed and just like go wildly diverse generation, you know, geography, ethnicity, the way that food is even intersecting with all these stories. That was my goal.
And Eurie, you know, one thing is, I think it's really noticeable that this is a film about Asian America, but there's like no stories from California in there. The closest connection is the Sushi King, who was born in LA but is in Texas. And I was just kind of curious about your decision not to have anything that was, you know, explicitly from California.
I mean, we did kind of struggle with that. At one point, we weren't sure if Grace could interweave some kind of LA-based narrative around the fact that she lives there. But we kind of touched on it in the intro. But I think ultimately we had to like go as far as possible to kind of resist the blowback of like, where are the Filipinos? Where are the like? We could not cover as many countries as or ethnicities as possible, so we just were like, well, let's avoid, in a way, like let's avoid LA. And I mean, New York was still like, ooh, but you know, if we got as far away and pushed the boundaries with Pacific Islanders and Hawaii, even if you talk to Hi, she wouldn't necessarily call herself an Asian American, but we wanted that category to be as big as possible. So I think that was kind of went into the decision for the not LA story.
I mean, you could make a whole show for one mini mall in Koreatown in LA, you know, and or just one block of, you know, the street that or Orchard Street or something, you know. So once we sort of got beyond that, we're like, okay, well, where are the good stories? Where are the stories that are resonating with us? Where are the stories that are sort of illustrating, you know, the kinds of things we want to talk about?
And Wilson, I'm curious, you know, in the film you're talking about how you wanted to do stuff at Namwa, but then you're like, it's not quite the right place to just go crazy, and you can kind of go crazy at Fung Tu. But I'm kind of curious, so you're kind of separating out two parts of yourself, I guess. There's like one part of you that you can do through Namwa, and one part of you that you can do through Fung Tu. And I'm just curious about that experience of kind of splitting them up and having different businesses and different identities for different parts of your you know, business models and your creativity.
I often use the term I have a foot in two worlds. You know, I have my right foot. I'm in like I'm a very, very Chinese. Like, you know, we're in a very old Chinese restaurant. Our chef's has been working with my uncles for decades. And those are things that are harder to change. And then I have another foot in like this whole new world that I'm working with innovation and chefs like Jonathan and just cool stuff. And my goal is how do I marry the two things ultimately one day? And I'm working on it. You know, it's slowly, you know, we just opened a restaurant in Philadelphia that is under the Namwa brand. But, you know, my chef there is slowly changing things up, and it's exciting. You know, we're making chicken dumplings, and, you know, if I told my uncle I was making chicken dumplings, he would kill me, you know, and you know, and stuff that I do with Jonathan, you know, it's very seasonally driven. It's, you know, a lot of memories. Like we were what was it that I ate the other day? When I was sitting down with my wife.
Duck wings.
Yeah, like it was like duck wings. You know, I have this memory of my mom bringing this container of cold duck wings from Chinatown, and it's very meaty and it's got a glistening of fat in it. And here I am, I'm sitting in Fung Tu with my wife, and he brings out duck wings in a much nicer setting, no glistening fat on the skin. But I'm like, wow, this is awesome, you know. But they're just duck wings, you know. But it's like, wow, you know, like it's like a memory that I've had as a child, and you brought it back. Yeah.
And Jonathan, I'm curious, you know, maybe 15 years ago, we may have used the word fusion. I know it's probably not a good word to say anymore, and to define certain types of cuisine. And I'm not, but to describe what you're cooking at Fung Tu is kind of hard to say what it is. But I'm curious about how is there a way to describe it, or a way that describes it that kind of captures what you're doing?
American Chinese, I think, is the maybe easiest way to describe it. But to have Wilson have that experience, that's exactly what I could ever hope for. That there could be some sort of a memory that's unlocked, and some sort of real feeling through the food. I mean, that's what the heart of everything is at Fung Tu. Is there? I'm really into making sure that the food has stories behind it, and it's not in a contrived way. It's not like having to force things. There's lots of stories in my head that just constantly are coming out. I can't not do it.
It's interesting because, I mean, if you're living in another life, you might be a writer, writing novels or short stories. But in this life, you're kind of expressing that through this thing that has, like, different textures and different combinations of flavors that deliver that same type of idea.
Yeah.
And Krishnendu, I have a curious for you, because coming from like a food studies perspective, and in this film it really seems like there's a sort of the combination of race and community and food is very distinctive within Asian America. And I was wondering, is there something unique to Asian America and the experience of Asians in America where you have this combination of these things, or do we see very similar dynamics in, say, other diaspora cultures, in Indian communities in the Caribbean or Japanese in Brazil, or is there something about kind of how race operates in this country that produces community and food in a certain way?
I in fact think in lots of places, and the beautiful thing about Asia and Asian America is because Asia is a big place. So in some ways it's a question of re-territorializing also, and that's why I think it really is disruptive of this affiliation that we have developed in the relatively modern world, that races belong in nations and they should stay there. And so say Indian food in Trinidad is in that way disruptive, okay? And so in that sense, all diasporic cuisines are like that. So that's the power of it. I don't know enough about all these different places to know whether the specificity here is not replicable somewhere else, so I'll stop there.
It's interesting because in a lot of ways it seems like we were talking about assimilation in some way in the film, and it's so interesting in this country where you have I think, Grace, in some of the voiceover you're saying how the food assimilates really easily. It becomes everyday food, but somehow Asian bodies don't assimilate so easily, and it's weird because it's like you can love the cuisine, but or you can go out to eat Indian food every night, but do you have any Indian American friends? Maybe, or maybe not, and so there's like this weird, I don't know, disjunct between how we consume culture and also how we live it too. An observation, any thoughts on?
I think something Grace mentions in the intro is that like Asian food was Chinese restaurants, and like I think you can tell recently like there's kind of an explosion of. It seems like it was really weird to eat the eyeballs out of the fish or whatever when you were a kid, but like now it's like there's like more of this appetite for that stuff, while like there's still this intense xenophobia. So I mean, you're right that I don't know if ultimately it will come around into helping people understand Asian Americans as like citizens of the United States, or as like actual, like you'll even like there are people who just say Americans and they really mean white people, right? But they're saying Americans, and Asian people aren't Americans. So I mean, it's internalized, I think, in some respects, and I think it is all around us. But I guess part of the hope with the film is that as things become popular or consumable, more I don't know. I mean, that's like a terrible way to say it, but that this increase in visibility in the food, how will that translate into more humanizing of the people? I don't, it will probably still take time, but I think that we're hopefully moving in that direction.
A quick example, in fact, when I was growing up in Delhi, and as a Hindu middle-class boy, we never, in fact, there was all this rumor about what Muslims eat. And we would go to, say, Nizamuddin or the Old Delhi Jama Masjid area. And it was partly this enticement of the exotic that drew young men there, Hindu boys. And so I'm kind of in two parts of it. One is I don't want to be so naive and say, well, if we just eat other people's food, we'll all get along and be happy, and the end of racism. Then on the other side of it, also I'm not that pessimistic. I find it, for instance, in my experience, it was an opening that made Muslim ecumene kind of less distant, intimidating. It became tougher for me to easily dehumanize South Asian Muslim identity just because they're beef eaters. Okay, so I don't want to be my experience, not that naive, but also don't want to be deeply pessimistic that any engagement with the other can only mean the consuming the other on your terms. Whenever you consume another, their terms come into play.
Great, that's really a nice way to say it. I want to open it up to the audience now and see if there's any questions. Yeah, right here.
Hi, my name is Erica, and I'm a master's student in the Food Studies program at NYU. I had a question about your use of humor in the film. That was one of my favorite parts. And I was wondering if it was something that you wanted to do before you started the film, or it was just the subjects that you were using, or something about food and humor that you found went well together.
I think it's just myself and humor. I seem to find humor in a lot of situations, and I like to bring that out. But I think it's a humorous world we live in, even when there's shootings happening. I mean, I think that for me, it's just, if you've seen my other films, I use humor a lot. I not intentionally. I think it's just part of who I am. I mean, one of the things I think is interesting, what you just said, is really resonates with me, because on the one hand, critical of people who just come in and consume, food and think that they're experts. But on the other hand, as a filmmaker, going into communities that I know really nothing about, except that, we're making this film, the food really is the way to have a conversation, and people are so generous and wanting to share that part of themselves. And I don't know, in my own, in Korean, a lot of times I go home and my parents don't ask me, how are you doing? They ask, have you eaten? So I think that's one way that helps me as a filmmaker sort of express myself, is to rely on people's willingness to be generous with their culture and food.
Hi, for Jonathan and Wilson. There was an observation I made about how Houston, or at least some of the stories in Houston, they took their food culture and expanded it, wanting it to be more palatable to the American, put that in quotes, taste. So I guess when I observe from the narratives, your narratives, right, about Fung Tu, it seems like you're creating something that's nostalgic and something that you want to, see now and present that you have seen before. But does maybe wanting to, kind of like the narratives in Houston, making something more palatable or something that will be more widely accepted, does that ever come into your thinking? And I was just wondering if your process about that.
Yes, it does. I mean, we've been talking about sort of the art behind the food in the restaurant, but the restaurant is about commerce. It's the intersection of art and commerce, and what you're speaking to is really important. And I had things like homemade tofu with like reduced fish sauce and house-made beef jerky. It didn't sell that well, you know. So I was like, oh, you know, there's this thing called meatball, you know, it sells pretty good. So I decided to put meatballs on the menu, but it was an avenue to be creative as well. I mean, one of my grandfather's favorite dishes are lion's head meatballs. So it was a way for me, an excuse for me to delve into how do I make a really good lion's head meatball. And I had an idea to serve them in Chinese savory crullers, like the dough sticks, and use those as buns, which is, again, people in my family would probably say that's really strange, but they act as little buns, and so that came about, and that was one of our best sellers. Chicken wings, it's another thing. You know, chicken wings are huge. It's like burgers, check. Wings, you know, and so I came up with a wing recipe, and again, it was still an avenue for me to express, you know, stories, but the commercial is really important. So I'll just plug the restaurant. Come visit. Yeah, come eat at Fung Tu.
I mean, that's one of like the topic that we talk about all the time. You know, like what can we make that is easily understandable? So like the perfect example, like the meatballs. Oh, everyone knows meatballs. Chicken wing, everyone knows chicken wing. But the way Jonathan makes it, you know, still has the art into it. Like the mustard that we use in the wing, it's damn good. You know?
And Wilson, so you grew up in Namois. That's been in your family for a long time.
Yes.
And I'm curious, like, you know, over the years, have you noticed, have there been different trends on what's, like, has the menu changed much? And also, are people eating different stuff? Like 20 years ago, were people eating a lot more turnip cakes or certain things now? Like, are there trends in dim sum as it's become more popular?
You know, that's a great question. I think I've just, the stuff that we sell is basically the same, but it's how I've kind of categorize it. So, for example, you know, we use the phrase vegetarian, gluten-free, and there's stuff that's on our menu that's already gluten-free, but, you know, now that I say that it's gluten-free, we've collected a whole new audience, and please ask server for gluten-free soy sauce. And now we're on every gluten-free blog about, I mean, I didn't technically create gluten-free dim sum, but there was just stuff that was naturally gluten-free, and we've been making a killing on that stuff. So changing things, not much, but I think just, I guess the marketing side of it, or like just how to reword things to make it more understandable, educating people, has led to more success.
Wow, lots of questions. Let's take one over there in the back.
I have two sets of questions. One is for Jonathan and Wilson, and then the other one is for Grace and Eurie. For Jonathan and Wilson, what kind of clientele would you say is attracted to your restaurant? And do you ever have like the traditional older folks ever being daring enough to come try your food?
I think we have a pretty wide mix. I mean, I've been in there at you know, I don't have a role there per se, but like I've been in there at 6 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, at midnight, and you know, we have the older diners that come in for the 6 o'clock sitting, you know, and then we have the more rowdier bunch towards the midnight sitting. So I think it runs the gamut as far as clientele are concerned. We also have an excellent wine program. So, I think our partner Jason does a really good job marrying the beverage program with Jonathan's food. So it's an exciting place. We have a big cross section of different customers. So yeah, I don't think it's we have Chinese folks in there, right? Yeah.
To echo your response, yeah, it's a very diverse group of guests, and it's really fun when Chinese people from China come and experience the food. There have been times when we were serving the tune leaves, when people would be like, what? You have tune leaves here? How is that possible? They've never even seen them in a fresh state. They're usually salted, and to be able to give that experience and to see the excitement on guests, that's a pretty savvy guest to even know what a tune leaf is and to know to have context with it, and so that our guests are very diverse and they run the gamut.
And then for Grace and Eurie, if it's okay for me to ask another question, I'm wondering, Grace, how your vision for this film, this project, compared to the actual outcome of the film. I mean, the end result. Did you just let it evolve, or were there surprises in how the final outcome turned out compared to your original vision?
I think it's pretty close to what I had envisioned. I mean, while we were researching stories, I wasn't sure exactly how it would sort of pan out with different regions and different kinds of stories. I mean, there are definitely unexpected things that happened. I mean, for example, with the Oak Creek story, the Lungar story, that started because I had heard about Lungar just as a concept, and thought, that would be really interesting to observe in any Gurdwara. But just sort of thinking about it further, and the 2012 shooting had happened a year prior to when we were filming, and I thought, it just occurred to me, what's the story there? And that was a real opportunity just to, I had no idea, I had no real connections, and just sort of contacting them, and they were so open, I even the local sound guy who worked on that part of the film from Wisconsin, and he's like, oh yeah, I was here back then, but we were across the street, nobody ever goes in there, and so I think for a lot of people, nobody ever gets to set foot in a place like that, even though it's open to the public, so that was a really interesting sort of evolution of what the idea was, and then sort of what we ended up filming.
And where do you plan to distribute this? I mean,
I should say it was produced for public television. It's going to air nationally on PBS on December 8th, so check your local listings. And just a quick plug, there's a website, which is a kind of bad website. It's very complicated. It's cammedia.org/off the menu. We have cards outside. There's a companion website that has more stories from the film, recipes. I think Jonathan has a recipe on there, and it'll be continuously populated leading up to the December 8th broadcast.
But this is a question for Wilson and Jonathan. I'm a native of the Lower East Side, and my family's lived there for 100 years, so I'm probably eating as Wilson, your family's restaurant as long as it's been around. I'm just curious, Chinatown right now is becoming financially bombarded by hipster restaurants and bars, and there's been fights over who belongs in Chinatown, whether there should be Chinese establishments. I'm wondering how economics plays into being a restaurateur, especially wanting to be close to the geographic emotional center of a cuisine particularly in New York, I guess.
Well, that's a hot topic. How do I answer that? That's a tough one. I don't want to say the wrong things.
Well,
what do you think?
Our location, well, the location of Fung Tu, it is symbolic of what the restaurant is, in that it straddles the Lower East Side and Chinatown, and the restaurant straddles various worlds. And as far as the neighborhood, I guess we try to have a relationship with it. So Wilson, he has all these amazing contacts with purveyors, Chinese purveyors, and I would say artisanal food purveyors. They don't have huge beards, they don't have fancy aprons, but they have the best soy milk, they have the best tofu, the beef jerky people. We went on this fabulous tour. Wilson guided us to 5-6 different beef jerky purveyors, and we found ones that we liked, and we used them at the restaurant. So there's a relationship established, there's an economic exchange, and I get to talk about these purveyors when I have press inquiries, like, oh, what kind of soy milk do you use? Or we buy our wide rice noodles from another little special purveyor. I've collaborated with Russ and Daughters. That's been another really fun experience, being a shop owner in the neighborhood. Is other shop owners in the neighborhood, long-established shop owners, have reached out and asked. So there's Russ and Daughters does a herring pairing event with the new Holland herring, which I only recently this year experienced, and they're so special. And Nikki Russ was like, hey, would you like to cook with herring? And so there's this collaboration, cross-pollination.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that, because maybe we can talk after.
Off the menu, off the record.
Off the record. Because it is, I think a lot of it is, real estate driven, as yeah, it's hard, for me, the restaurant that I have, in Chinatown, and even the restaurant over in Lower East Side, that's my playground, like I grew up in this neighborhood, and it's kind of weird, and like there's all these bars and different, it's things going on right now, but it's a hot neighborhood right now, and we need to take advantage of it, while we're still young, and it's the same story I was saying, how I have a foot in two worlds, and it's my time to kind of make use of it.
Krishnendu, I have a question for you. There's so many ideas that like the film brings up, that listening to Wilson and Jonathan bring up, and I'm curious, I'm not sure if a lot of folks here know much about food studies, but I'm curious about how all this set of ideas that's about, everything from gentrification to aesthetics to taste to cultural tradition, all that stuff. How do what we have seen and heard tonight connect up with how food studies works as a discipline?
Lovely pitch. Now I can pitch the program. Yes. No, in fact, that's what it is. I would just quickly, the idea is that the idea behind nutrition and food studies was one of the few places where you can do humanities-related work in a science and a social science environment, and that's rare. And part of the understanding comes out of this realization, which is new to the sciences, that to the nutritionists, for instance, that people don't seem to be following the instructions. We know what's good to eat nutritionally, but people are not eating it, or at least don't claim to be. So the realization was this: maybe we understand food, or maybe we understand nutrients, but we don't understand people. And to understand people, we need to add humanities folks, and especially what I call the science of subjectivity and intersubjectivity. We have a handle on the science of objectivity. We barely have a handle on the science of subjectivity and intersubjectivity, which is that as somebody said long ago, people don't eat something unless it's good to think with. And this is what it is about. It's no matter what you're talking about. So like your example was a terrific example. Same damn thing, you call it gluten-free and it's fashionable, so everybody eats it. right? The absurd side of that, and the other side is the old tradition in some ways of what is my parents live on east coast of India, on the coast, on the beach. They're rice and fish eating people. They never eat fish from the sea because it violates a category of what is edible. The edible is only the sweetwater fish, okay? Which is where, in some ways, you can say culture triumphs geography, and sometimes it is a function of geography. So that's exactly, it's a lot of fun in food studies that we're able to do that. I'm surprised they pay me to do this.
This is a question for Grace and Eurie. I have a question about your research process that you discussed. Can you talk about how you selected the stories and if there was any story that fell on the editing room floor that was particularly compelling, or how you selected these particular stories out of all the ones you might have researched? I'll start. I mean, we had many different sort of tentacles out, and we did a couple of. First of all, this was co-produced with KQED, which is the PBS station in San Francisco. So we don't even have a California story. It's really embarrassing for me. But we did a kind of public convening in San Francisco. We invited people. I mean, it was so popular. Everybody wants to talk about some kind of food-related story. Sort of, you know, we kind of put the word out that we were looking for stories. We also had a couple of meetings where in New York and LA and maybe San Francisco as well, just talking with sort of people in the field, food studies, you know, writers, chefs, sort of gathering ideas, not necessarily of people, but story. Like that's where Lunger came out for me at one of those meetings. And then just sort of good old-fashioned like investigative research, just sort of thinking, I knew for sure I wanted a Midwest story. I knew for sure I wanted a Hawaii story because of the role that Hawaii plays. And then, it was sort of casting a wide net and then realizing, oh, there's some diversity of geography here as well as, you know, oh, it'd be nice if there was some kind of food supply, kind of sustainability farming story. And Hawaii ended up being that. So it was just kind of a process of casting a wide net, you know, start talking to people, interviewing people beforehand, and then deciding. Do you want to answer?
I mean, specifically, a story that didn't make it in was a taro farm in Hawaii that's actually like up the mountain from where the fish pond is. 'Cause we had these grand ideas about like this is the Ahupua'a system in Hawaii and how like things from the top of the mountain like affect things that go to the ocean, and wouldn't that be cool to, you know, see that happening? And it's just like we can't explain that. We don't have time. There's no time for that. And then we did shoot a bunch of Vietnamese crawfish restaurants in Houston, so you kind of see it in the film, but it just like the articulation of why that's popular didn't hit the right notes that we kind of needed for the film, especially as the opening story. So that didn't quite make it in. Those are like really the only two like developed things that we pursued that we just didn't have the time to do.
But I think when I met Jonathan and Wilson, I was like, oh, their story. I mean, I think personally, yeah, they were opening, you know, but also personally, I think I related most to them just as second generation, like doing something off the beaten track, trying to express yourself through something creative. I mean, that really spoke to me as a filmmaker as well. So,
is there anything that we can get off the menu at either Namwa or Fung Tu?
There's a lot at Fung Tu. You just gotta know the right people.
That's good.
And you get the homemade tofu and beef jerky.
Oh, that one. No, there's
variations of it though.
Yeah.
You know, the chilaquiles and the beef or broccoli. Yeah, that's new stuff.
And before we wrap up, then, so Wilson, tell us what we got on the menu over at the reception.
I actually don't know.
Yeah. It's gonna be a surprise.
Yeah, it's like noodles and dumplings.
The Namwa special.
Yeah.
Gluten-free.
There's some gluten-free stuff.
Cool. Well, I want to thank everyone up here for coming out tonight. Grace, Eurie, Jonathan, Wilson, for coming.